Do you think there's any possibility that he was assassinated by Israel?
I've never. Well, when we're talking about possibility, almost anything's possible.
Anything's possible.
But there's not good evidence to support it, and there's probably pretty good evidence not to.
Mr. Wilson, we meet again. Oh, why must you slopfest Joe Rogan? Why must you do that? Why must you force my hand? Why must I contend with such utter garbage? Well, I guess I have to, because you have thrown down the gauntlet. You have self-anointed as the defender of the prosecution's narrative, and you have also attacked my buddy, Baron Coleman. So let's do this. Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. This is Clint Russell. I'm going to obviously cover much of the conversation that Andrew Wilson had with Joe Rogan, but I'm also going to briefly, towards the end, I'll talk about Burritogate. If you haven't heard, burritos should cost $20, and if you got a problem with that, you just need to work harder, or you're probably a socialist. And then at the end, I'm going to give my thoughts on Tucker Carlson's 10-point plan to save America. We'll get there, but first, let's dismantle the Fed slop.
Now, oh God.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
If you went into X tomorrow, let's say, and there was an option there where you could select it and it's like U.S. accounts only, that's all you could see, do you think that 90% of the traffic for people would go away?
A giant percentage.
Huge percentage,
Huge
right?
percentage is people being manipulated into arguments. It is a strategy.
By foreign assets,
By
right?
foreign assets.
Yeah.
It is a strategy. It is real. This is not tinfoil hat shit.
This seems like a relatively minor point, but I always find it funny when someone goes on a show to debunk conspiracy theories, and then they start to demonstrate their own affinity for their own preferred conspiracy theories, because we all have them. And for the record, I agree with this one. Obviously, there are immense bot networks that exist on social media to try and craft narratives, to try and persuade the public in X, Y, and Z different directions. But you'll notice throughout this 3-hour conversation, there was a blind spot that Mr. Wilson demonstrated when it came to one particular nation. I'm sure you'll never guess which one it was.
Right now, you have progressives who are funded by ActBlue, right? And I've proven this. We traced all their money. It's progressives funded by ActBlue who are pushing the same narrative that like Candace Owens and others are pushing on the idea of Charlie Kirk's death and the conspiracy around that. So
they're absolutely being paid to push this?
Well, their stated mission, this particular progressive group, their stated mission was to take down TPUSA. I'll tell you a story. This is the tale of all tales.
Okay.
So we come out of the gate and our horse is already hobbled. I don't think we're going to make it down the home stretch, but his argument here is once again another conspiracy, but not the conspiracy that we're pontificating upon, but rather, is there a conspiracy to get us to believe that TPUSA or the government or intel agencies were actually behind taking out Charlie Kirk? And his argument is that, yes, there is a conspiracy and that it's through ActBlue. But the thing that doesn't make sense is that there's this PAC called National Ground Game that is alleged to have been behind this operation to undermine and ultimately destroy TPUSA. But based off my research, they only attended 2 of Charlie Kirk's events before his passing. Oh, and also that super PAC had raised less than $1 million. So I'm not sure how you could argue that that would be enough to get all of these people talking about XYZ theory when it came to Charlie Kirk's assassination. I think that it is really probably a lie, honestly. So what does it amount to? Well, in my view, it amounts to poisoning the well. He's trying to make it seem as if, sure, there's interest in the attack upon Charlie Kirk, but in fact, it is astroturfed. It is fake. Ignore it. And you'll notice that he does this with quite a few topics.
Here's what the theory is. So take Ian Carroll, within 24 hours after Kirk's death, blames Israel. Within 24 hours, he says, Israel killed Kirk. That was his tweet, went mega viral. What the conspiracy is on that side is that Israel, along with Erica Kirk and TPUSA insiders, got together with elements of the U.S. government to murder Charlie Kirk because he was going to leave the, quote, pro-Israel cause.
Now we're getting to the meat of the argument. He's trying to recap our perspective. I'll just put us as a camp, the people who are questioning the prosecution's narrative on this. And I really don't appreciate the framing, largely because, well, obviously Ian's my buddy, and I'm not sure that Ian is actually 100% confident as to what transpired on that day. I don't think that really anybody is in our camp. I think we're all kind of just trying to figure it out, and we're pretty open about that fact. But that's really the problem here, is that they're trying to reframe it as those questioning the prosecution's narrative have to have the answer. We can't just say, I don't think that the evidence is adequate to convict. I don't think that the evidence is adequate for us to stop looking for co-conspirators or other angles that may have created this event, or to say that it looks to us like there was other groups that had serious motivations to want to see Charlie Kirk taken out, and therefore we ought to keep digging. No, Mr. Wilson demands that we have a ironclad, bulletproof, Charlie Kirk's neck bulletproof narrative as to what happened. If Tyler Robinson didn't act alone, who did it? Tell me now. If you can't tell me now, then why should we even be listening to you? Well, you ought to be listening to us because we're being honest, that we don't know who did it, that we're trying to figure that out. Why aren't you?
Theorists you're talking to, but they all work together in the same unison from a single camp, which is interesting.
And he made this claim a couple times, which I found perplexing. He says that we all work together from this single camp, this separate camp. And it's like, no, we don't. Like we've all literally discovered each other over the past 10 months because we've all been on the same beat. We've all been digging in our own particular avenue, our own niche interest. And as a consequence of that, yeah, we found kind of kindred spirits in this fight. And now some of us talk periodically. Like I might text, but I rarely. I text Ian maybe once a month, probably once every other month. Barron, the same. I've never talked to Candace Owens in my life. I mean, she's responded to a couple of my tweets, but that doesn't exactly constitute a collaboration effort. But again, what he's doing here is he's poisoning the well. He's trying to make it seem as if we're all in coordination trying to destroy TPUSA and lie in unison. Couldn't be further from the truth. We're literally just going through the case as new events come to light, or new facts come to light, or new evidence comes to light, and we are adding that into our analysis, which is what really every sane person is doing right now.
Like, yeah, the shirt is moving, but also a bullet is going like how many feet per second, whizzing through the air? Like, do you understand?
Splits air.
Yeah.
So where's the air going to go?
People don't understand that.
You know what got me, though? So I went back and looked, because they say that it's the same explosive which was used inside the Israeli pagers. Now, that was very real. Israel sent these pagers all over.
But that would be an explosion. That's my take. My point is, like, there's no indication that there's an ignition.
It's worse. There's no smoke.
Right.
Now we are deep in the Fed slop morass. So they're challenging, obviously, the John Bray shape charge microphone theory. As I've said many times, I don't know if that's what happened, but the shirt effect, the effect on his shirt, on Charlie's shirt, is so dramatic. And yes, it's possible. It's theoretically possible that the 30-06 hits Charlie Kirk's bare neck. It creates such an immense and instant cavitation effect that the flesh expands, snapping the necklace. The necklace and the microphone go moving at very rapid speeds. The microphone comes across and the necklace swings up. And that's all you see. That's the whole reason that his shirt goes up like this. It's also possible that that's not what happened. It's also possible that there was some sort of PETN explosive that was in that microphone, and that's the reason that you see air rushing out of his right arm sleeve, and that's the reason that you see the shirt come flying up. It's possible. And his ironclad proof that that's not what happened? Well, because there wasn't any smoke. As if the pagers against Hezbollah and Lebanon, because that technology had smoke, that explosive had smoke. Therefore, this can't be done by the same organization. Can't be, right? Because there's no smoke. As if you couldn't have evolved your tactics over the decade that it took you to place the PETN inside of the walkie-talkies for Hezbollah. But he goes much deeper on that theory, and I will cover that in a second.
It's this, what is it, PETN explosive? This is the particular type that had to be used for the size of the microphone. But you have another problem. The mic's on the wrong side of where the wound is.
Right.
The other is there's no burn marks. There's no smoke. There's nothing. There's nothing to confirm this theory at all.
One of the things I found most alarming about Andrew Wilson's performance here is that it seems as if he's genuinely oblivious to the arguments that are the counter arguments that are being made. For those that are unfamiliar with John Bray's hypothesis about the shaped charge as being the device that took his life, it is in fact his theory that the projectile came through the chest, and that is an exit wound. That's his argument. He is not arguing. So when Andrew Wilson says that, the explosive microphone was on the wrong side of his body, that's not what he's arguing. He argues that it enters through the chest cavity. That's why you have such destruction within the chest cavity, and then it exits out of his neck. That is actually the argument. And it's just weird to me that a guy who has basically dedicated the last month of his life to trying to debate this topic doesn't even know one of the largest countervailing ideas that exist out there. Additionally, Charlie was hunched over. And because of that hunch, the way he's leaning, you would actually have a trajectory that would allow for, even from the right side of his body, for it to enter on the left side of his neck. The obvious explanation for that is because he's leaning and the shirt has some sag to it. It could be that it still had line of sight, so to speak, to the left side of his neck. Now, again, I'm not saying that's what happened, but it's as if he's not even begun to unpack the alternative theories here.
It says only 11 were killed by the pagers.
Still pretty slick.
That was extremely slick.
I mean, crazy. They sent him off to them years ago.
That's some CIA shit, man. Like, that's some deep state.
That's Mossad shit.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's probably where the CIA learned it.
Just a throwaway line here, but I thought it was really interesting that they are talking about a known Mossad attack, which was the Hezbollah Lebanon pager attack, which they had installed the PETN explosive and then they let them sit there dormant for years, triggering them all in unison in this massive grand operation. And then they bragged about it. And what does Andrew Wilson say there? He says, that's some CIA shit.
That's some CIA shit, man.
No, Andrew, you literally know that that's Mossad shit. We all know that. So why is it that even when you know that it was not our intel agency, you're still bringing up the CIA? Just an interesting data point on your biases, is it not?
Are gun experts, and they have a problem with it too. The thing about guns, though, is weird stuff happens
constantly
when you shoot bones. Like, it is possible that you wouldn't get a pass through, depending on how it squared the spinal column, depending on how it hit, and depending on what kind of bullet it is. I forget the type.
These are 150 grain core lock soft tips.
That's right.
And they're soft tip.
Right.
So they only have enough of a jacket to keep the bullet together.
Right. The idea is that it expands inside the body, causing massive trauma.
Right.
Now we're getting into the 30-06 angle, and I thought it was interesting because, as you guys know, I'm not even sure that Andrew Wilson is aware, but it has been argued, I think that the medical examiner was in fact the person who said it, that the Charlie's neck, his vertebrae, somewhere in the area of 6 of his neck vertebrae, which is almost your entire neck, was obliterated, gone, poof. So Rogan's bringing up, look, he's right. Yeah, sometimes bullets do weird things to a certain extent, right? And he's basically arguing that, well, maybe it hits bare flesh of the neck. It connects with the spinal column so directly that it does not have any opportunity to divert its trajectory, right? It doesn't have any opportunity to exit the body. So, but here's the thing. You have to remember what the facts are. According to the facts that as we understand them now, based off of the prosecution's narrative, this 30-06 round hits the softest part of the human body, comes straight through to the back, it has to make basically direct contact with his spinal column. And in that process, it obliterates 6 of his neck vertebrae. So a bullet, this size in terms of the actual contact point with that spinal column has to then obliterate all the way up to almost the base of his skull. And who knows, maybe that's what happened. But then you have to also contend with the fact that all of that force, the adequate force necessary to cause that amount of damage, then just stops. Even though you're totally obliterating the entire spinal column in the neck area, it does not exit.
I haven't used that particular round,
Gotcha.
But it just seems like it's a lot of energy
It is
coming towards your neck. it's hard to believe that it wouldn't blow a hole through the neck and leave a big fucking, just take a chunk out, that it would just make a round hole. But that's beside the point.
No, Joe Rogan, that is not beside the point. That is the point. That is the whole reason that people have such a hard time believing it, is because of what he just said there. He is acknowledging that our concerns are valid, that yes, it does not make sense, that sure, theoretically it's possible. A 1 or 2 out of 100 shot, maybe. But the vast majority of the time, a Mauser 98 firing a 30-06, soft point or otherwise, making contact with the bare human neck, even if it has a trajectory to hit the spinal column, which I personally don't believe that it does, at least not from the Lossy Center, but okay, assume that it does. Still, the vast majority of the time, you would expect an exit wound. And yet we did not see one. That is notable. That is worth considering deeply.
There's other weird stuff with like the video. There's a lot of people saying that the video is super clear. They're seeing 4K footage. It's clearly Tyler Robinson on the roof. No, it's not.
Jack Prosobic and Vinnie Johnson.
That's crazy that they said that.
I appreciated that Rogan was willing to push back here. He was willing to actually challenge the influencer narrative about the 4K HD trigger pulling footage that doesn't exist. And you will not believe the defense that Andrew Wilson has for this.
On the roof, gets in a prone position, and it looks like something that might be a rifle, right? It's blurry as fuck.
It also does look like there's kickback on the right leg.
It looks like there might be some recoil.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. You guys can rewind to the prior episode I just did on this story, or I guess it was 2 episodes ago. I don't see any evidence of kickback. He says it looks like there's kickback on a right leg. I don't see, and there's nothing there to make that argument at all. There's literally nothing. But his defense only gets worse from there.
I DM'd Jack Prosobic and I said, just be straight with me. Like, did you try to over sensationalize this thing for clicks? Like, what's the deal? He said, no, listen, the footage we did see inside the courtroom was actually a lot clearer than anything that the public has seen so far.
There you go. The footage that Jack Prosobic saw in the courtroom was actually clearer than the footage that Candace Owens played on her show. Consider me skeptical. I don't think that's true. In fact, I'm 100% confident that's not true. There's no way. Why would it be any clear? Candace has an electronic file of it. Why would it be clear for Jack Prosobic looking at it on a monitor? Why would that be clear? That doesn't make any sense at all. At best, and this is me being nice, he has the same footage. He has the same quality look at it that we all have. And he just lied.
The other thing that was weird was the guy in the crowd that jumped up and said, I killed him. That's weird. And that guy, wasn't he at the Boston bombing as well?
So he's a professional agitator who's been at tons and tons of these events.
This is what Andrew does the entire episode. Or I shouldn't say the entire episode because they only talk about this for about 30 minutes of the 3 hours. But for any time he's talking about the Charlie Kirk case, he basically just soft pedals or waters down all of the weirdness with this case. And he does the same thing here with George Zinn. So let's just remember what happened. Shot rings out or whatever rings out, explosive noise, Charlie goes down. And within seconds, George Zinn, this guy who clearly did not actually kill Charlie Kirk, jumps up and says, I did it. I killed him. Shoot me, kill me, right? And in that confusion, that insane moment, obviously the police grab him because he's taking credit for it, and they take him into custody. And they think they have their man, at least for the first couple hours after the attack. The exact window when you would want to have them diverted, when you would want their attention diverted towards someone other than the actual assailant. And Andrew Wilson waters it all down and he writes it all off as this guy is a professional agitator. Yeah, obviously it's possible that George Zinn is just a crazy person. He's just a guy that happened to be at the event. And in the split second that he realizes that Charlie Kirk's life has been taken, he decides to voluntarily jump up and declare his own guilt because he's just crazy. And then he gets arrested, and then he's also charged with having pictures on his electronic devices that he shouldn't. Maybe he's just a lunatic, and that's just the type of guy that would do something like that. Sure, it's possible it's also possible, can we at least acknowledge for a second that it's also possible that that's the exact type of guy that an intel agency might deploy to try and get their actual assassin out of the venue? Is that possible too? Can we be straight with each other here? Come on. I just found out something wild about stem cells. They're like these little tiny repair guys that go through your body and repair different cells and other things that need to be fixed. Joe Rogan's been talking about it for years. Just watch this.
I had a full-length rotator cuff tear, and the UFC gave me a doctor in Los Angeles, and he looks at my MRI and goes, "You're going to need surgery." I go, 100%? He goes, "I don't know how you're using it now. It's a matter of time. You're going to need surgery, so it might be better to do it now." So I got it shot up with stem cells. And this was the early days of stem cells in America where you could get away with more. That you got to go to Mexico now.
But here's the crazy part. Most stem cell therapy in the U.S. is banned. It's illegal. Not because they're unsafe or don't work, but because they kind of challenge the big pharma monopoly, because they work too well. If you could heal your knees or fix your back or recover from surgery without pills or insurance or endless doctor visits, well, then what happens to their profits? The FDA has blocked these treatments, and it forces most people to go overseas to get treatment. And it's expensive and unregulated. One stem cell treatment can run you back $50K. But there's a natural way to support your own stem cell activity, and that's from high flavanol cocoa. Studies showed that flavanols in cocoa stimulate stem cells to come out of your bone marrow, like bees coming out of a beehive in your bloodstream. Harvard scientist Dr. William Lee actually backs this up. Check it out.
So, studies have been done to show that the flavanols in cocoa stimulate stem cells to come out of your bone marrow like bees in a beehive in your bloodstream, and they go out and they find wherever it needs to be repaired. If it's in your heart, they'll fix it. If it's in your liver, they'll fix it. If it's in your skin, they'll fix it.
That's right. Dark chocolate. But here's the thing. Flavanols are the good stuff in the cocoa making process, but they're oftentimes destroyed in the making process. That's where Black Forest Supplements comes in with the first ever high flavanol cocoa powder, packed with everything your body needs, and it's only 20 calories. I mix it with my coffee or my protein shake. It tastes amazing. This isn't regular cocoa, it's stem cell fuel. And listen, the 4th of July promo just ended, but I reached out to Black Forest and they gave me a special promo just for you guys. So for the next 48 hours after this episode airs, you can get buy one, get one across the entire store, including their best-selling cocoa formula, as well as a free NMN. That's right, a free bottle of NMN with every single order. 3 bottles for the price of 1. Because this deal is exclusive to my audience, you're going to have to use the link in the description below or in the top comment. Grab this amazing deal while it lasts and take control of your health before somebody else does it for you. That's blackforestsupplements.com/lockdown.
One of the most disturbing aspects of it is the people who promote this actually don't want their worldview or their positions to be examined. They only want to examine the evidence from the state. It's like that would be fine, I think, if it was the case that you made no claims past that.
Right.
So if you just only say, hey, I'm not really sure what happened, and I want to really kind of review the evidence, and that's that, I don't really have a problem with that. I think that that's probably healthy. The issue that I run into is when people make claims past that. Oh, it was an exploding mic.
Right.
It was 2 different shooters. It was a folding rifle. It was a 30-06 couldn't do this. And
This part just drives me crazy. I mean, it's okay. It's okay for you to question the prosecution's narrative, but if you have any theories that are counter to the prosecution's narrative, well, then you have to debate Andrew Wilson, I guess. It's like, look, man, I've got lots of other hypotheses as to what may have transpired, and I think I've got comparable evidence to feel the way I do as the prosecution does about Tyler Robinson. That doesn't mean that I'm prepared to go to the mat or declare it definitive evidence. If I thought that I had that, I would be contacting the defense and saying, hey, I have hard evidence that shows that what your client is innocent. That's not how I feel about it. So this entire demand that we debate Andrew Wilson about this topic is so strange to me. And for the record, I'd be happy to have a conversation with him. But see, this is the weird thing. He doesn't have a real argument. He doesn't have a firm position either. Literally, his argument is that he believes that the preponderance of the evidence leads him to believe that the most likely answer is that it was Tyler Robinson. So he's not even making a definitive claim. He's not saying, my position is Tyler Robinson did it, and I'm going to defend the prosecution's narrative by which he is about to be convicted. That's not his argument either. So he's leaving wiggle room. He's telling you that he's not certain either, just as we are. We aren't certain either. So what exactly would we be debating? I don't know.
Oh, it's a well-studied phenomenon. Another one would be Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King gets hit through the jaw, ends up here. Well, if it's just going to blow through all bone, why did it stop in him?
Going back to the 30-06 argument, and he's now arguing the MLK case. But the MLK case is obviously dramatically different. It hits him directly in the mandible, the jawbone. And then it exits, and then it re-enters into his, clavicular area, and then it stops in his shoulder. So that's a entry, exit, entry, stop. That is not just entering the softest part of the human body and then hitting the spinal column and then stopping right there. In short, it's a crap comparison. And my understanding is that Andrew Wilson, before becoming a professional, internet blood sports debater, was some sort of gunsmith. I know he knows how different those two stories are. And yet he uses that as an example of how there's not always an exit wound. There was an exit wound with Martin Luther King Jr. It just happened to be another entrance wound after that.
Why did it stop in him? Well, it's because the second it has impact, it begins to slow down, and then it impacts something else, slows down even more. So it's totally possible that this guy was hit with a 30-06. I don't know why that would be in the realm of impossibility.
And there's your proof. He knows exactly what happened. And he's explaining how, it hits, it slows down, it hits again, it slows down more, and it stops in his shoulder. But that's not what happened with Charlie Kirk. It enters, there would be virtually no deceleration as it enters the neck. Very, very soft, fleshy part of the body. It's going to require a hard substance to slow it down significantly. And in this case, the prosecution's narrative is that it's the spinal column. Okay, fine. But that's a totally different dynamic to what happened with Martin Luther King Jr., and Andrew Wilson knows that. But he brings up that as an example anyways, even though he knows it's a weak one. I think that that's very telling as to how mercenary-like he is in this endeavor.
The Israel thing, there was some text messages back and forth where Charlie was talking about getting out of the Israel business. And there was this position that he had where he did not want us to go to war with Iran.
All true.
And he had a lot of influence. And then there was also that Israel supposedly had offered him $150 million to be more pro-Israel.
That is the problem that we've run into. Is like, I've never been able to verify that was the case. And
so where does that claim come from?
This claim basically comes from this camp without anything to substantiate it.
No, I could be mistaken about this, but I'm pretty sure it was Max Blumenthal over at the Gray Zone that was talking about the $150 million offer. Or at least he was confirming Candace Owens' claim that there was, in fact, a conversation between Bibi Netanyahu and Charlie Kirk in the Hamptons a few months prior to the assassination. But the bigger thing to note about that clip is that he says all true when he's talking about the text messages that demonstrated that he was, in fact, being pressured by his donors, to the fact that he was threatening to abandon the pro-Israel cause, the fact that he opposed the Iran war, the fact that he had, in fact, been lobbying Donald Trump before the bombing campaign that summer, which took out the nuclear facilities, as you recall. But what does Andrew Wilson harp on? He doesn't contend with any of those very valid points, which he admits are all true. And he just says, I've never been able to verify this $150 million claim that was offered from Israel to TPUSA or Charlie Kirk to take them to the next level. He's never been able to verify that. So he just uses that as the defense for the totality of the counter argument or the hypothesis that perhaps Israel was behind this.
From some of his donors about who he could or couldn't platform. And so as a negotiating piece, he said, well, I'll leave the pro-Israeli cause if you're going to try to tell me who I can and can't platform. And that was kind of what his position was. So this actually doesn't surprise me a bit that these guys are fighting over who you can or can't platform. If you're giving your money to an NGO for the purpose of giving the pro cause, and that NGO is saying, wait a second, I'm going to platform people who are against your cause, of course the donor is going to get pissed.
I found this to be revelatory. The way Andrew Wilson views TPUSA is as a pro-Israel NGO. That's what he says right there. He is saying that TPUSA was supposed to be a pro-Israel NGO. an advocate for Israel blindly, that they were not to have any sort of countervailing views, and that included guest panelists at their events.
If you're giving your money to an NGO for the purpose of giving the pro cause.
And while I agree with his assessment, actually, that I think that's basically what TPUSA was and is, or at least is for sure at this point, it should be pointed out that most of the public, most Americans attending TPUSA events or seeing his clips on the internet didn't think that. That's not what they thought about Charlie Kirk, at least. They thought he was about open debate and dialogue and defending free speech and capitalism and small government, kind of a quasi-libertarian argumentation. But to Andrew Wilson, it's absolutely no surprise at all that the donors to TPUSA would be angry about who Charlie Kirk was platforming, because that's not what TPUSA was. In Andrew Wilson's worldview, TPUSA was strictly a pro-Israel NGO. Interesting.
Do you think there's any possibility that someone else killed him? Do you think there's any possibility that he was assassinated by Israel?
When we're talking about possibility, almost anything's possible.
Anything's possible.
But there's not good evidence to support it, and there's probably pretty good evidence not to. So for instance, the guy was still very much of a pro-Israel guy, even up to death. It is true that he was fighting with donors about the cause.
But if he could have been a substantial roadblock to the Iraq war, or Iran war rather, if he was a substantial roadblock, I mean, that's not outside the realm of possibility that a nation state would take a guy like that out.
They didn't take out Fuentes. They didn't take out Owens. They didn't take out Ian Carroll.
And this is where I get pissed, because I know Andrew Wilson is smart enough to know how different that is. His defense of this is to say, well, they didn't take out Fuentes or Ian Carroll or Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson, so obviously they didn't take out Charlie Kirk, right? But we all know why that's different, don't we? Charlie Kirk was still in the inner circle of the Trump administration. Charlie Kirk had spent 2 days lobbying to try and stop the Iran war. Charlie Kirk also ran the #1 get out the vote organization on the right wing in America. Maybe the #1 get out the vote organization, period. I'm not sure about that, but hugely influential, credited with bringing Donald Trump back to power. Additionally, the primary difference is that Charlie Kirk was receiving tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars from Zionist donors. And to the best of our knowledge, you can't say the same about Candace Owens or Nick Fuentes or Ian Carroll or Tucker Carlson. So there's a hell of a lot of differences. So when Charlie Kirk says, I'm going to abandon the pro-Israel cause because they keep telling me who I can and can't platform, and I just can't live like this anymore. I can't have people calling me an anti-Semite while I go around the country defending them. And then less than 48 hours later, his life is taken. There's reason to think that that could be correlated. Andrew Wilson knows that. He has to be willing to admit that for me to take him seriously. And the fact that he's not willing to admit that, and instead to bring up a bunch of examples that are not one-to-one cognates by any stretch of the imagination, you know he's lying to you.
What's interesting about all of it, if you follow the details of it up until Kirk's death, TPUSA actually moved a lot more towards the Groyper-Fuentes position than they moved towards the kind of pro-Israel, this type of position. Meaning a lot of the ideology that I think Kirk was changing on came from these various outside influences. And so if that's the case, why wouldn't you just curtail those outside influences, and then you can keep Kirk as the mouthpiece, right?
And this clip has gone totally under the radar. I haven't seen anybody talking about it, but I think it is the most important clip in the entire couple hours. What Andrew's arguing here is that, sure, they were starting to shift in terms of like guest panelists at these events to be more Israel critical, or at least skeptical, having Dave Smith and Tucker and maybe having Candace back, right? And they had shifted, in his words, towards the Groyper side of the argument. But his argument here is that, well, then why not just curtail their influence? Why not just basically detach Charlie Kirk from those figures, those people, and then you could still keep him as the front man for the organization, as the pro-Israel shill? Andrew, for the love of God, that's what was happening. That's exactly what they were attempting to do. That's why Shillman and others were withdrawing millions of dollars. They were trying to curtail their influence. They were trying to get Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and Dave Smith away from Charlie Kirk to keep him as the mouthpiece. And Charlie refused, and you know he refused. And then he was killed just a month later. I mean, it just can't be more obvious, can it? That's the whole reason that we believe that is a viable motive to consider. Because it is. Because it's the number one motive that you ought to be looking at when it comes to someone like Charlie Kirk having their life taken. Because all of these dynamics are true, valid, proven, beyond refute. And no, it doesn't prove definitively that Israel called the shots and that's the reason that Charlie Kirk's life was. It doesn't prove that. But you have to be, if you're being honest at all, you have to at least admit that is the number one reason that someone with the power to take his life and the ability to get away with it and to set up a frame job of a patsy like Tyler Robinson, theoretically, that's the reason that they would do that. And Andrew Wilson knows it, which is exactly why he's saying, why didn't they just try and get these bad influences away from Charlie Kirk? Because he's admitting to you that, yes, it did bother them. And yes, justifiably they were bothered because they're donating to TPUSA and to Charlie Kirk to push a uniformly positive Israel messaging. And he refused.
You can't rule anything out as possibility, but it seems likely to me with how much trans have been shooting everything up for the last couple of years and how often it's the case that you find leftists involved in these signal groups and involved in these group chats and things like this for the purpose of radicalization. Wouldn't surprise me a bit if there was a left-wing conspiracy assisting Tyler Robinson and radicalizing Tyler Robinson.
And he has spent the past month arguing about how my camp doesn't have evidence. We don't have real valid arguments to be made. But what is he doing there? I'm going to defend my good buddy Ian Carroll. He's doing the same exact thing Ian Carroll did in the 24 hours after the attack. Basically, Andrew was saying that it wouldn't surprise him if it was some radical lefty defending his trans lover because so many trans shooting cases have happened over the past couple years. Well, that's exactly what Ian Carroll was doing. I don't know if you're aware, but that's the reason that he was jumping to that conclusion is because he's saying, hey, there's one country that's super fucking famous for political assassinations, and it happens to be our greatest ally. And Ian Carroll has as much or more evidence for that feeling, that suspicion, as Andrew Wilson does for it being some radical trans leftist. It's just obvious that the only time he's willing to consider a conspiracy, saying that perhaps in the Discord messages they were radicalizing online and game planning this online, and he's willing to consider that possibility. Well, the only reason he's willing to consider that possibility is because it fits his worldview. It affirms his biases, that he believes that the left is radical and dangerous, and therefore it was probably them. And who knows? Maybe that'll turn out to be the case. But it's just as probable, or possible at least, that it was in fact not that. That in fact, the Ian Carrolls of the world that say, hey, I've been reading a lot of books about how this one particular nation is responsible for more than half of the political assassinations worldwide, and Charlie Kirk was about to abandon the pro-Israel cause, and I think that it was probably them. In fact, I think that that's a much more reasonable argument to be made than, well, there's been other trans shootings in America, so therefore Charlie Kirk got shot, and therefore it had to be a trans shooter. Basically what I'm saying is these arguments are all valid and all lacking in terms of definitive evidence. And in my view, this is my honest opinion, had Andrew Wilson not been hired by TPUSA to coach up their debating team, I don't think that he would be on this side of the debate. I honestly don't. I think he would have stayed quiet about it, and he should have, because this is, in my view, destroying his reputation. One question seems to come up every time the economy gets a little uncertain. Is now the right time to buy gold? And honestly, I don't know. And I'd be pretty skeptical of anybody that claims that they know definitively what comes next. The better question isn't whether or not gold goes up next month. It's why do people buy gold in the first place? Most people aren't buying it because they think they found some magical secret investment. They're looking at it as a way to help protect their purchasing power. Kind of an issue that we're dealing with right now. To diversify a portion of their portfolio, to prepare for the unknown. If those reasons still make sense to you, then it's worth taking the time to understand your options. That's where Augusta Precious Metals come in. Their experienced educational team offers one-on-one, personalized educational web conferences where they'll explain how physical gold and silver work, how a gold IRA works. They'll answer your questions and help you understand your options. Then you can decide what's right for your own situation. To learn more, visit lockdowngold.com or text LIBERTY, that's Liberty, to 35052 to request Augusta's free guide. Free. Because the real question isn't, has gold already gone up? The real question is, has the reason for owning gold changed? And to me, the answer is it hasn't. Again, that's lockdowngold.com or text Liberty to 35052. Now, a lot of people have very negative opinions of him, as you can see in the comments. to the top comments on the Joe Rogan episode yesterday was like, oh no, not this chode again. People don't like this guy. But I'll tell you, you're not going to add any fans to your ranks with this type of piss poor performance. This really slop fest. That's what it was. It was a slop fest. And because I believe that Andrew Wilson is actually smart enough to understand the arguments that I'm making, I'm just going to assume that this is a case of the old adage that you can't convince a man of something that takes food off his table. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but that's what this looks like to me. It looks like your financial interests are aligned in professionally defending the prosecution's narrative and dismissing what I think you know are valid concerns about it. And I also have to say that given that I do believe that you are a gifted debater, this tells me that this is as good as your side's got. This is as good as you can do. And it ain't good enough. And if this is as good as you guys can do, I think you're going to see Tyler Robinson walk. I honestly do. Now, granted, we're probably 6 months or a year away from a full jury trial, and Lord knows if we ever even get there. And maybe there'll be additional evidence presented at trial that changes my opinion. I think that the difference between, what I actually am and what people like Andrew Wilson think my camp is that we are open to changing our minds, that we are open to new facts as they are presented to us. And I am totally sincere in this. If it turns out that there is additional footage that shows beyond a shadow of a doubt that Tyler Robinson was the guy on campus and there's actually a rifle there and he fires that shot, then I'll be the first to say, put him away forever. But as of now, I don't think you can even say that there's a rifle on that roof, much less that Tyler Robinson is the figure that we see on that roof. And I think if Andrew Wilson was force-fed truth serum, he would admit that too. And I'll end by saying, Joe Rogan, have me on. No, I'm just kidding. Have Barron, have Barron on, have Candace, have someone on that can actually make this argument in a way that's at least more compelling than the Andrew Wilsons of the world, because that was embarrassing, truly.
Have you spoken, and if you can't talk about this, no problem, but have you spoken with any sources in or around or in some way connected to the knowledge of like the thinking of his family and where they stand on whether or not, at this point, whether or not they believe he actually did it?
They don't think he did it. Now,
did they think he did it at the time?
No. They've never thought he did it.
They never thought it.
And what's miraculous is that we get to the preliminary hearing. We've been told for 10 months that he confessed to his parents, and that's a key component of this. That's why we know he did it. He confessed to his parents. He turned himself in. He confessed to his parents. He turned himself in. We heard this for 10 solid months. We get to the preliminary hearing. They're not even on the witness list.
And as Barron told Julian Dory just a couple days ago, it seems as if the grandmother, I've seen these text messages too from Diligent Denizen, that grandmother doesn't believe that Tyler Robinson did it, and the family doesn't believe that either, and that in fact he never confessed to them. And I have to agree with Barron. I do. I completely agree with him that had his parents told the police when he, scare quotes, turned himself in, that he confessed to us, that you call them to testify, you forced them to confirm that information because that is as good of probable cause as you could possibly deliver, and they did not do so. And I think that the reason is because it didn't happen. And now we just have to pray that Tyler Robinson survives until trial so that we can actually find out what the hell did happen.
It's been obvious for a while now that our system is not working as intended because the people in charge of it seem to be looking out mostly, not exclusively, but mostly for their own interests. And you see that all around you.
So Tucker Carlson had this long-awaited Declaration of Independence that he was floating the idea of, and it came out last night. And it was good, but it was not really a game plan per se. It was more of a list of grievances, I guess you could say, and ideological framework or 10 kind of good ideas or just general principles to strive towards. So not a real game plan by any stretch of the imagination, but he lists out all the problems, and I agree with 99% of them. He says that there's wars, obviously the unconstitutional, undeclared, illegal wars that we are waging in the Middle East again, the advent or the flood of AI and what that'll do to the job market and to the broader economy, not to mention surveillance, our privacy rights, potential for additional militarism and dangers in that avenue. I agree with him on that. I'm not sure what it'll amount to, but it's certainly reason to be concerned. And he laments the fact that we have a uniparty, that we don't have a real option, that we're all being spied upon and robbed and thrown into wars that we shouldn't be fighting, and ultimately sacrificing the future of our country and the future for our children on behalf of special interests and foreign lobbyists. And I agree with all of that. And his overarching narrative is that they're all very hostile towards us. And I think he's right about that. So his 10 principles to strive towards amount to recommitment to fairness, reclaiming our sovereignty, re-embracing our productive capacity, I assume by onshoring industry. Most of this, honestly, was like kind of 101 MAGA, including Maha. He talked about becoming healthy and embracing beauty and trying to create beautiful things, which I think is kind of nebulous, and I'm not sure that we want the government involved in that. I guess his argument would be, well, let's just have the government, when they do produce buildings, have them not be hideous. It's like, okay, fair. He wants to re-embrace honesty and wisdom and prioritize children. And the reason being, aside from the obvious, is that he believes that it creates a kind of a longer time horizon building process or planning process, a la what China has been doing, 100-year plans. If you don't have a next generation to look after or to build something for, well, then you probably are just looking towards the next quarter. And it seems to be more or less a criticism of modern capitalism, that we are just looking towards quarterly earnings and we don't actually have a true vision for the future. Well, I don't think that's necessarily a criticism of capitalism, but rather a cultural framework, that we don't have delayed gratification or longer time horizon planning. And I agree with him that that is a problem. I'm not so sure that it's actually a product of capitalism, but rather, crony capitalism, corporatism, or fascism, which is, I think, a more apt description of what we actually deal with today. And he wants to stop mass migration and, reclaim a national identity of some sort. And I think that's probably the most important thing we can do, and probably the most challenging thing we could do. How do we actually find a unifying national framework or identity and ethos, given that we are so terribly divided, that we are so terribly at each other's throats, given that, even when it comes to trying to figure out who took out Charlie Kirk, people on the right wing are at each other's throats, given that academia is churning out, leftist psychopaths 24/7, people that genuinely not just hate this country, but hate white people that have deeply racial identitarian worldviews. I'm not sure. And by the way, some of them self-hatred. Some of these are white people coming out that hate themselves. So how do you actually contend with all of that and create a unifying national framework? And I think that the answer is that it's ultimately going to have to be very broad. It's going to have to be these kind of broad appeals to beauty. And that's essentially what Tucker was trying to deliver there. I think that the problem is that it needs to be actionable. It needs to be not just talking points, because as we all know, when you just get talking points like make America great again or America first, but you don't actually have a game plan that undergirds that, broad platitude, well, then you can get sidetracked. You can have it co-opted. You can have it stolen out from under you, which is exactly what happened with the Tea Party and MAGA and America First. America First is now actually fighting wars in the Middle East, don't you know? And he also levies terrible criticism of the tax policy in this country. And while I agree with him, I would like to abolish the income tax, I completely disagree with the avenue of attack that Tucker takes on it. He argues that capital gains tax is essentially demonstrating that we value capital more than we do labor, because the tax rates for long-term capital gains is about half that of the income tax. And the reason I disagree with it is very straightforward, is that once you have capital to invest, you have already been taxed on that money. So if you, like, exactly what he's arguing in the prior segment is he's arguing that, we ought to have longer time horizon planning, that we ought to be delaying gratification, that we ought to be building something for the future. Well, don't you want to incentivize that, Tucker? I know you do. So the way that you incentivize that is to create a tax system that actually does incentivize investing your capital and not being double taxed into oblivion, because you have already been taxed to save that money, right? In order to get $1 million to invest, you have to have already made probably $2 million, because after taxes, that's what you're going to have. So once you have that nest egg and you haven't blown it on a Bugatti and you want to invest in the stock market, should you still be paying 45 or 50% taxes between state and federal? I would argue no, definitely not. Now, I'll grant that I think the point he's making is more against the hedge funds and the uber rich billionaires, and not so much the middle class people who, by their bootstraps actually get themselves to have $1 million nest egg. But still, I think it's very dangerous to, criticize tax policy in what I think is a very kind of blindly populist and really left-leaning way. But overall, I agree with his criticisms. And I think that if you're going to be, going after debt and arguing that it's immoral, that you ought to be hammering the Federal Reserve. I would just encourage you to add that to your list of grievances, please, for me. And as I've said repeatedly, I'm very hopeful that Tucker and MTG and Joe Kent and Massey can create something to replace this immense vacuum that we have after the rug pull that was MAGA. But unfortunately, again, as I said earlier, having any sort of unifying movement is going to be very challenging, in no small part because everybody on the right wing is at each other's throats.
I almost can't even. It's almost like slopulism is what you people fucking deserve at this point in time. You deserve Thomas Massey, you deserve Tucker Carlson, you deserve Marjorie Greene. That is literally, you do not deserve anything better than that, because that is what you people are. Thomas Massey's looking pretty good for president, huh? Why? Because he voted against foreign aid to Israel? Yeah, okay, he's a libertarian. Like, he's not our guy at all. Marjorie Greene, she's a fucking hillbilly bandwagoner. She rode the wave of MAGA in 2018 or 2020, whenever she got elected. Tucker Carlson's obviously a CIA, so he's some kind of op. He's some kind of operation.
Oh, God, Nick. This is the thing I don't get about Fuentes. I mean, you got so few people in Congress, in D.C., even in the commentariat, but in the political class whatsoever, that are courageous enough to actually vote against and lose their political careers to try and prevent more wars for Israel, which I know you oppose, and you seem to hate them. I mean, MTG and Thomas Massey and Joe Kent, all of them sacrificed their political careers to take stands that are in perfect alignment with your worldview, and you fucking hate them. And next to Nick Fuentes, I don't think there's another political commentator that has done more to shift the right wing's perspective on our relationship to Israel than one Tucker Carlson. And Nick Fuentes fucking hates him. And I'll grant, maybe there's personal picadillos or beef that they have that I'm not privy to, but it's just like, can we set the fucking petty ego shit aside? All of us, please? Oh, Thomas Massey's a libertarian. He's not our guy. Okay, who the fuck is your guy? Who's your guy? Tell me who he is. Let me actually evaluate and compare and contrast his track record to Thomas Massey. And you tell me that you have anybody in DC in the past fucking 40 years that is as good as Thomas Massey. Tell me who. I would love to know so I could send them money so they can get reelected. But I don't know who they are. Oh, MTG and Thomas Massey and Joe Kent and Tucker Carlson, they don't stand a chance. But I don't know, James Fishback does? James Fishback's likely going to get blown the fuck out in Florida. You think he's going to run for president? Who do you got? This is a sincere question. Who do you got that you think is viable? Because I'm not even saying I think Thomas Massey is going to win. I think it's possible that he could if everything goes right, maybe. But I'll admit, Thomas Massey is my guy. Yeah, he's a libertarian. So am I. But he's a hardline immigration hawk, America First libertarian, which you ought to at least be favorable towards. And it seems as if you genuinely despise them. Why? And if you've got a plan B, fill me in. Let me know. I would love to understand actually what you're thinking, because for the life of me, I don't see it. You've got a handful of people who actually take the stands that you implore them to take. And then when they do, they lose their political career. They start to create an alternative movement to try and topple the duopoly, to actually separate our nation from Israel, to reclaim our sovereignty. And you go, these slopulous. Look, I've got disagreements with Tucker and MTG and probably, definitely Joe Kent and maybe even with Massey. I don't know. But I don't see anything better. Not even close to better. This is as close to my political worldview, a movement, as has ever existed in my lifetime. And I'm going to see what it produces, whatever that may be. And to be blunt, until Fuentes has an alternative that actually seems viable and preferable to that avenue, I don't even know what we're debating. So I'm going to stop debating him on it. The ball is in your court, Nick. Inform us as to the ultimate perfect plan that actually is viable and directly in alignment with your worldview, that isn't slopulist. Let me know. Because I'll tell you, the way things are going right now with the neoconservative right wing, like Ben Shapiro arguing in defense of $20 burritos, I think we're going to have two options. It's going to be left wing hard socialism, or it's going to be kind of uniparty Israel first policymaking. And the only viable third option I see at present is going to be whatever the Tucker, MTG, Massey, Kent alliance turns into. That is going to be our best and probably only hope. And I just got to say briefly about Burritogate. For those that don't know, Matt Walsh and Ben Shapiro all weighed in, and Matt Walsh was essentially saying, burritos shouldn't cost $20, and that was sparked off of a TPUSA post. And then Ben Shapiro was essentially arguing that this is all a product of young people expecting convenience, and they're getting their food through Uber Eats, and burritos don't actually cost $20. Look, if you grew up in San Diego like me, and you were accustomed to a carne asada burrito running you maybe $6 for the vast majority of my adult life, and now it's like $14, $15. And I'm not talking Uber Eats. Yeah, it would probably run over 20 if you were getting it delivered to you, but still, that's at least a doubling in my lifetime in terms of food costs for fairly cheap convenience items when it comes to food production. This is not elite gourmet stuff. This is just a regular carne asada burrito in California. It's obvious we have a real problem. And I'll tell you, this reminds me very much of the Joe Biden is sharp as a tack. And now it's food is actually affordable. You're just lazy and entitled. This is how you get Mao. I'm just being totally straight with you. Like, as I'm reading these comments from people just lying through their teeth about how food actually isn't that much more expensive. No. Let me be very clear with you. Everything is more expensive. And the reason is because your dollar is dying, because your currency has been debased, and it has been debased in large part because we have dedicated the past 25 years of our country to fighting wars on behalf of a foreign one. And when people say, oh, Clint, you're overstating how much of an impact that has had on our currency or on our culture or our country, wrong. Absolutely wrong. We have fought 25 straight years of war on behalf of Israel in the Middle East. That is extraordinarily cost prohibitive. Based off the estimates from Brown University, it was $8 trillion. That was effective 2019. It has now been 7 years since then, and another war and a continuation of the prior wars. I think it's very fair to estimate that our relationship to Israel has cost us at minimum $10 trillion. That is 1/4 of our national debt. And sure, it's not all Israel driven. Obviously, the lockdowns and the money printing bonanza that happened in 2020 played a huge role. The fact that we continue to spend at a breakneck pace, despite the fact that the pandemic ended forever ago, if it ever existed. And we are debasing our currency at a rapid clip. And yes, the entitlement programs are exorbitant. And yes, the graft from the corporate America or the lobbying interests domestically is extraordinary. And yes, ultimately, young people ought to work hard. I'll grant you that. But here's the thing. Here's what makes this generation so different, is that even if you do all the right things, even if you work super hard and super smart and you delay gratification and you save and you invest, unless you get lucky, there's a distinct possibility you still won't be able to afford a house, to start a family, to have kids. Whereas 50 years ago, if you were to have worked hard and saved and invested, you could have probably gone to college off of the wages of a part-time job. Try doing that now. You could have bought a home off of a mid-level corporate America job or a government job. Try doing that now. In real terms, housing is probably 3 to 4x what it was 40 or 50 years ago. And all the people who, literally all the same people who advocated on behalf of the Iran war are now trying to argue that you're actually just lazy and that food prices aren't up. They are up. And what's more infuriating is that they're saying this is all just downstream of, or lingering effects of Joe Biden's presidency, as if the lockdowns and the money printing didn't begin in Trump's first term, as if he hasn't continued to spend at a breakneck pace, as if he's not trying to get 1.5 trillion for our military defense, more than all of basically the entire rest of the world's military combined, all rolled into just our defense budget. And probably the most infuriating aspect of all this is they're showing this chart of inflation rates annually. And they're saying, oh, look, it got up to 7, 8, 9% under Biden, not including the fact that that was in large part because of the CARES Act and the trillions of dollars that were added to the money supply and the lockdowns that were all sparked under Trump in the last year of his presidency. And that was actually the lingering effects of that policy decision. But then they're saying, now look at once Trump comes in and the inflation rate has only been 3% per year. So it's so much better than it was under Biden. Mother of God, it makes me so angry. I'm sure all of you know this, but just to make it fucking crystal clear for those that don't, when you still have 3% inflation on 9% the prior years, you are still inflating. So that means you are going up from the baseline that was already increased by Joe Biden's level of inflation. So we were already inflated and paying extraordinary amounts of money for our groceries, and it has now gone up 3% per year on top of that. We needed price deflation. We needed to go back to 2019 grocery prices. We are still going the wrong direction. In short, there has been no improvement at all. It has gotten worse. And if you're going to lie to the American people about it, you deserve what's coming. You deserve Mao. The problem is that me and my camp don't. We don't deserve that because we argued fucking non-stop to stop debasing our currency, to stop wasting money in the Middle East, to stop with the crony capitalism, to stop with the ultra hyper low interest rates, to juice the economy over and over and over again. We argued against the bubbles. We argued against the debasement. We argued against the Federal Reserve. We argued against the wars, against the spending. We argued against all of it. You argued for all of it, and we're going to have to pay the same fucking prices that you all do. In fact, even worse, because we don't have the assets to weather this as well as someone like Ben Shapiro might. So in short, in terms of Burritogate, yeah, burritos shouldn't cost $20. And burritos cost way, way too much. And the reason they do is because of people like you. And I'm not going to forget it. As I told you guys last time, the algo has changed. If you are watching this and you do not like or comment or subscribe or whatever, hype, then no one's going to see it. That's the way the algo works from now on. So if you enjoy this show, I implore you, please, if you're listening right now, hop over to YouTube, hit the like button, leave a comment, subscribe, hype it. Hyping is probably the best, but I think all of them matter equally. It's just about engagement overall. And you guys always hype every episode into oblivion. So I really appreciate you. All right. I'll see you guys soon. Oh, if you want to support the show, at Liberty Lock Pod on X, subscribe there. I will follow you back. This is a limited time offer. It's $5 a month. It's an easy way to support the show. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, please leave 5-star reviews there. It really does help to show it to new people. See you guys.
Subscribe to Liberty Lockdown. Great podcast. Clint is tight.